Only person it seems like we're missing at the moment is Karen Peterman. Karen, can you?
Somebody just unmuted me.
All right, let's do it.
Punctual as ever.
No.
Okay, so I had planned for today to be less than an hour because I wanted there to be plenty of time for folks to interact and share stories. We may not have as much time for that now, but I'm going to try to go as quickly as I can. We did hope, if you think back to the meeting that we had in January, one of the things Catherine said at the end is that we are really hoping that these webinars and affinity group meetings that we have every month do become more interactive than they have been in the past, especially since we all know each other much better now than we did before we met in January. So there are a couple of times where I'm going to open it up for discussion, and please feel free to jump in if you have anything to say. What we wanted to do today is talk a little bit about data collection planning and some specific data collection procedures for the 2015 festival season. As you know, we have the attendee survey program for the year, and 2 festivals have already used it. And used it with success from what I know so far. So, 3 cheers for, first of all, for Emma for getting this gargantuan thing programmed and to everybody's satisfaction, and then for Charleston and Idaho for giving it the full test run this weekend. We want to share some details related to procedures that we would like all field researchers to use. We've been working with the teams that already had to hit the ground running to go over those, but we wanted to share them with the larger community today. All right, and so here's a roadmap of what we want to do in the time that we have together. First, we want to review the resources that we shared with you on the second day of the January workshop. You may remember getting a link to a Google folder, and we just want to do a quick review of the sample resources that you will find there. Then we want to spend a little bit of time talking about field researchers, who to hire, how many folks you might need, that sort of thing. And then we'll think about and talk about the data collection procedures that I just mentioned. When we met in January, you may remember that Amy and Mac and Stacy all shared concerns about the fact that we were going to have to come up with a standard system for collecting these data across the country and how we were approaching attendees, how we were collecting information. And so what we want to do is share a procedure for that today. And then we want to look ahead to a process that we'd like to have everybody use to share out once your festival has taken place and you've got your data in hand. One of the things that Stacy shared in her presentation on multi-site evaluation is the fact that people really benefit from hearing the successes and challenges of others, from hearing what people are learning, how they're going about using the data that they have. And so we want to make sure that we have a standard way to report that out across our community, and we're going to share some ideas related to that in a bit as well. All right. So what you see here is a list of the items that are available to you in the Google Doc folder called Eval Planning Resources. At the top of that list, what you'll see is something called What is all this stuff, which is sort of a combination cheat sheet and table of contents. If you haven't already looked at it, when you open that document, it will list all of the bulleted items that you see on this slide, as well as a quick summary for what that is. You are not required to use anything in this folder. So for the most part, the specific strategies that you use to plan and execute your evaluation are going to be up to you. But we know that several of you might be having to frame your evaluation differently. The scope might be different this year, and so this is a way to give everybody a running start for tackling some new procedures if you're having to think about incorporating those into your evaluation process for this year. We're not going to spend a lot of time going over anything on this list with one exception, and that's the timeline. And what I wanted to do is zip through the timeline that we've used in North Carolina really quickly as a way to sort of get the juices flowing if you are tackling some new procedures this year. So one thing that we try to do is start planning early. So a lot of this work has already been done, and those of you who are fall festivals are clearly done well in advance of this 3-month deadline because you've already got your attendee survey ready and programmed and waiting for you. So we're probably all in pretty good shape with these first couple of bullet points. But what we've tried to do in North Carolina is tackle any instrument development or identification that needs to happen about 3 months before our festival. We also use that time to identify any event hosts that can help us collect data. So if you're thinking about using both QuickTap and paper-based surveys, you might want to think about how to get in touch with event hosts and start creating partnerships about 3 months before your festival. About 2 months out, we finalize all the instruments and we interview field researchers, and I'm going to talk about more specifics related to that in a few minutes. 1 month before the festival, we have all of the instruments programmed and the copies made if we're going to be using paper-based surveys. We have hired our field researchers. We're sort of in the process of assigning them to particular events or shifts at events. We're in the process of trying to figure out what size t-shirt everybody wears or what kind of swag we're going to give folks so that they will look like they are part of the festival team. We found that that is really helpful in creating that initial comfort zone with people, going up to members of the public who are attending a festival event and asking them for a few minutes to complete the survey. It really helps open the door, and so that's an important component for us every year, is to figure out what the branding is going to be like for the field research team. We're buying additional supplies in that month before the festival, mailing out all of the paper-based survey materials to the remote sites that we have, and then confirming all of our plans with event hosts. If you have people who are going out to collect data and your field researchers are going to be sort of your frontline communicator with the event hosts, we typically send an email to connect those people and make sure everybody's on the same page as far as what the process will be for the day of the event. We're going to spend a fair bit of time talking about what will happen during the festival as part of this call, but what I typically do is train my field researchers in the 30 minutes prior to their first shift. For a lot of us, that's going to be 30 minutes prior to the expo or carnival, because that may be the only event that we're using to collect, that we're targeting for data collection this year. I've also done phone-based trainings for folks who are going to be going out and doing additional data collection and leading that on their own. And so there are lots of different ways to get this done. When it comes to using the tablets and using QuickTap, it's probably best to have the technology in hand, and so the 30 minutes prior to the first shift might be the best way to train those folks. A couple of other things to think about: if you're going to collect data, if you're going to have field researchers out alone collecting data at events, I typically ask those folks to arrive 30 minutes before the event begins. They are expected to text or call me once they've gotten to the location and have checked in with the event host to, first of all, from a management side, make sure that the person I think is at an event does actually show up to collect data. But there are also often logistical surprises that have to be tackled, and so sometimes it's good to have a text or a call to touch base and do that. The other thing to keep in mind is when and how you want people to get in touch with you at the end of an event. I also have people send me a quick text or give me a quick call to let me know the number of surveys that they've collected, and then I report that out to the festival team on a weekly basis. So it's my way of being accountable to both the people I've got out in the field and to my field research. Okay, the last thing to think about is whether you want to be collecting any online data from K-12 participants. That could be teachers, scientists that you're sending into the classroom, or your event hosts. We typically collect those data during the festival, and we send the initial survey invite out every Friday, on the Friday of every week. All right, then after the festival, 1 month after, if you've got online data collection still going, it's nice to go ahead and shut that down. Make sure all of your data entry is done in the month after the festival as well, and we'll talk about data entry in relation to QuickTap a little bit later as well. 2 to 3 months after the festival, we try to have all of our analysis done, and we're already reporting out. So in North Carolina, we don't do a narrative report for our festival results. We do a debrief meeting. And and those end up being pretty extensive slide decks they're usually delivered in PowerPoint, and then we report out to the advisory board as well. So there's a wide range of reporting that you can do after the festival. 2 to 3 months is really pushing it, and so some years we get that done very easily, and others we're really pushing to get things done by that 2 to 3 month window. All right, so those are sort of the general procedures and the general timeline that we use here. What I'm going to do next is shift gears and start talking about field researchers, but before I do that, I wanted to stop and see if anybody has any questions about the broad brushstrokes of scheduling for data collection. Okay, silence is a no. Let's move on and talk a little bit about field researchers. So odds are you are going to need a team of people to help you collect your data. And what we wanted to do is spend a little bit of time talking about some of the strategies that we know others have used in the past to recruit these folks and identify who they will be. But we also wanted to hear other strategies. I think this is an area that we know less about, relatively speaking, compared to some of the other procedures people use to identify and hire field researchers. So we're going to open this up for conversation in a few minutes as well. The first thing that many people are probably worried about is how many of these folks you actually need. There are a few things to think about. I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer to this question, although if somebody disagrees, feel free to jump in. One thing to think about is just the number of events that you're going to need to cover. The types of events. Are you going to need multiple people at each of the events, or are they contained events where somebody can probably just hand out paper-based surveys and pencils? And then for the intercept events and the expos and carnivals that we're all doing fall into this category, the number of attendees who are going to be there. The rule of thumb that we use here in North Carolina for our intercept events is that we want 1 field researcher for every 500 attendees, and we do that up to 10 field researchers. We've sort of maxed it out at 10 in North Carolina. Years ago, when I was evaluating the San Diego Science Festival, we sometimes had as many as 15 to 16 people, but that was for an event that had 30,000, 45,000 people at it. So these are the rules that we use. What you want to avoid, I think, is having so many field researchers that they are sort of stalking and hounding your attendees. And so I think the ratio of field researchers to attendees is something important to think about so that you don't tip the scale into just really annoying people all day long at the event.
Okay, Karen?
I think we mentioned this at one of the webinars earlier in the year, but there's really a wide range of people who can collect data. In North Carolina, we typically hire people to fill these positions and use part of our evaluation budget for that. There is a job posting sample in the Google documents, and so if you want to see the specific requirements that we post in the job advertisements that we use here, you can see the list there. And it's a pretty select group. So we look for people who have graduate level training. They can be early career grad students, that's fine, but what I've found is that people who have some sort of basic methodological training make better decisions on their feet out in the field than even undergraduates do. So we've moved toward this paid model here in North Carolina. In Seattle years ago, they had tremendous success using volunteers. I've heard more stories about the challenges associated with volunteers than successes, but Seattle had this fantastic plan, and I think there were a lot of really strategic and smart things about it. So I thought I would share some of their strategies in case it's a model that might work for you. They had a general orientation meeting where they brought all of their volunteers together. So they had already identified their core of volunteers for helping run the festival. They brought them all together for an overall orientation, and as part of that, they talked about the different volunteer roles that were available, including evaluation. So they talked about what evaluation is, why it's important, what the job would be, and then they had their volunteers self-select to be part of the evaluation team, and those folks worked out beautifully for the Seattle team when they used this strategy a few years ago. So that's a model you might want to think about adapting and making your own. Graduate and undergraduate students can also be a great resource. We've used graduate students successfully in North Carolina. We've had less luck with undergrads. But I think that others of you out there have had more success. So I wanted to take a second and open it up for questions again and see if anybody has any other strategies for identifying field researchers and how to do that successfully. Okay. This is I think the last slide that I wanted to go over really quickly are the hiring process that we use. We post jobs on Craigslist and through different university departments. Our local AEA affiliate, that's the American Evaluation Association affiliate, also has a listserv that helps us reach into many more departments than we would be able to otherwise. And so we post it to that listserv and then people forward it along to their students. All of those have been successful strategies for finding people to hire for these positions. And what we did for the SFA evaluation years ago when I was helping Goodman Research Group with that, and what we continue to do now, is to ask for both a resume and a cover letter. And if we don't get both of them, it says in, I think, bold type on the bottom of the job posting that if they don't submit both, we're not going to consider their application. And the reason for that is because, you know, in my mind, if somebody can't follow the basic directions in a job posting when they're trying to get hired, they're not going to do a very good job of collecting data for me in the field either. So we do a first pass through the resumes and the cover letters we get. We toss anybody who doesn't give us both. And then based on the folks who seem like they have relevant experience, we ask them to complete an online questionnaire that gathers more direct experience about the kinds of intercept data collection or observation or whatever it is we're having them do in the field. We go ahead and collect their t-shirt size as part of that. We get their availability for the shifts that we know we need to cover so that we've got all of that in one database. If we feel like there are people who we still need to learn a little bit more about, then we go ahead and do phone interviews with a final list of candidates before making offers to people. This can be a fairly intense process. We have needed up to 30 field researchers from around the state in North Carolina in the past. We're using fewer now than we were before, but this is sort of a full hiring process if that's something that you want to explore for your festival next year. Okay, anybody else have hiring strategies that they want to throw out or share with the group?
Hey, Karen, Denise.
Does anybody have something they tried that did not work and that you would recommend people avoid? Because I think that kind of advice can be just as useful.
Karen.
Hi, Karen.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. This is Jordan Rose from Atlanta. I just wanted to suggest connecting with your university evaluation students, either in public health or in any kind of social sciences, psychology. They're often looking for these kinds of experiences, and you may not have to pay them.
And Jordan, did you guys wrap that into a practicum kind of experience that was part of a course, or they just were hungry for the experience and so did it for free?
We actually ended up not going that route for our science festival last year, but I've used that for other projects, and occasionally there would be one student who would use it for a practicum. This person would be doing much more thorough work on the festival evaluation or the program evaluation. But in general, there are program evaluation courses, and if those courses align as far as the timeline with your festival, then you can get a group of students from that course who are usually looking for real-world experiences to either create your instruments or design the evaluation plan or collect the data, etc.
Nice. Thanks, Jordan. Anybody else have either best practices to share or cautionary tales related to field researchers?
I guess to capitalize on what Jordan just said, we actually got into contact with the Future Faculty Association, and we actually managed to get into contact with quite a few people, and we kind of sold it as a volunteer sort of experience, so they get to kind of know what a non-traditional STEM program looked like, and we actually got quite a few bites based on that alone.
Nice. And sorry, who was that talking?
This is Chelsea.
Hey, Chelsea. Thank you. All right. Let's talk a little bit more about collecting the actual data. I know I already talked about t-shirts, but I think they're really important. And so I was going to mention them here again as well. T-shirts, buttons, any kind of swag that you can give to your field researchers to help them look legit and to open those doors with the public are going to be helpful. I tend to collect those in the week or two before the festival, and they pick them up at their first shift. So during that training shift when you've got folks using QuickTap for the first time, typically people get their t-shirts then and they just change before they head out to collect data or just throw it on over whatever else they're wearing. One thing that I think will be different for all of us this year is the potential need to print out a list of events or a list of booth names for your expo or carnival. We talked about this a little bit when we met in January. There are multiple festivals who have tried to use open-ended questions in the past to gather feedback on, what was the best thing you did today, what was, or even the event name, what was the best station you attended today. And it's remarkable how quickly the feedback that comes in from the public becomes so general that you can't really use it to make meaning of what they're talking about. So we actually had a great conversation with Tinkerfest in December, I think, or maybe early January, because this was a challenge that they experienced last year, and they were looking for strategies. And so one of the things that we talked about is coming up with sort of a Chinese restaurant menu list that has a number associated with each of their station names. And you could do this for your booth names for your festival as well, depending on the scope of the expo that you're trying to evaluate. And that way, if you arm your field researchers with that restaurant menu list, people can just type in the number of the event that they're attending or the number of the booth or the station that was their favorite from the day and really focus on the why. A lot of you chose the question that is, what was your favorite booth today and why, or what was your favorite station today and why. And we think that the best way to get quality data in response to both of those questions is this sort of Chinese restaurant menu strategy. The other thing, even if you're not going to pick numbers and associate numbers with your events or with your booth names, if you chose that event name, you're going to want to make sure that all of your field researchers type that in with exactly the same name so that you can sort your data easily once you have it to analyze and make sure that you don't have to spend a ton of time cleaning your data or trying to understand which events are actually the same. So that's something to keep in mind and make sure you tackle before the festival itself. When it comes to data collection at expos and carnivals, I typically arrive really early to these so that I can map out the venue. I divide the venue into zones to make sure that there's one zone for every field researcher that I'm going to have out and collecting data. That helps prevent a lot of overlap or all of your field researchers congregating in one area. It also makes sure that we get a good geographic spread across the venue and all the venue has to offer. So I get there early, I map out the zones, and then assign field researchers to those zones. I typically try to limit data collection shifts to a couple of hours tops per zone. So even if I have somebody who's there collecting data for 4 hours, I will mix it up for them halfway through. So they'll spend their first 2 hours in one zone and then get to shift to a different location. If you've never collected this kind of intercept data before, it can get pretty tedious very quickly. And so anything you can do to mix things up to keep your field researchers fresh and active and interested is a good thing. So for a 3 or a 4 hour shift, I typically assign people to 2 different locations and everybody switches and goes to a new location halfway through. You might remember that when we met in January, Karen from St. Pete asked a great question sort of at the tail end of our time together on Thursday about how to train people and allow them to tinker around in QuickTap without basically contributing junk data to our database. And we came up with this strategy for having 2 versions of the survey on QuickTap. So one is called Trainers 2015 Attendee Survey, and this is the version that you will use to train your field researchers. It does have the draft text behind it, so you will know that you're in the draft section, the trainers section, or version rather, of the survey if you can see those red draft labels behind all of the questions. When you're training them, we recommend that you use this, that you let them tinker around in it, make sure they're comfortable with both the technology and the kinds of questions that they're going to be asking. Once you're done with your training and you're setting them loose to gather data from your attendees, we'd like to recommend that everybody does a visual check to make sure that they have exited out of the trainer version of the survey and that they are now in the live 2015 attendee survey, which is where we want them to collect the real data from attendees. In case you don't remember, when you're looking at the tablet, there will be a little red X in the bottom left corner. If you continue to hit that little red X, you will eventually come back to the main survey menu where you'll see all the surveys that are loaded onto your iPad listed in the left-hand column, and they can access the survey there. All right, so here's where we get to the prescriptive part. And I want to thank Amy Graff-Nelson. I think I saw her sign on earlier. Amy shared the procedure that they use at Science Museum of Minnesota, and we've sort of created a hybrid of what festivals have done in the past and some of the best practices recommended by Amy's museum to come up with the procedure that we want everybody to use for this year to approach attendees to complete the attendee survey. So what we want to ask your field researchers to do is pick an out-of-the-way spot in their assigned zone. Once they are in that spot, that is sort of their starting place for collecting data every time they are ready to approach a new attendee. You're going to ask them to draw an imaginary line from the spot that they're standing in across the traffic path of attendees, and then they're going to count the 5th eligible person or group to do the survey. When they're doing their count, a person counts as 1 and an entire group counts as 1. So if one individual walks by, that's 1. If a group of 10 people walk by, that's 2. If another individual walks by, that's 3. Another family walks by, that's 4. The 5th family to walk by, the first person who is age 10 or older in that group to cross the imaginary line is the person that we want your field researchers to approach and to ask to take the survey. This is, we think, the closest that we can get to achieving a random sample of people at your festival. And so it's the process that we want to use to try to make sure that we're not accidentally or unintentionally cherry-picking the people who look the happiest, the friendliest, the most like our field researchers to approach as part of the festival. We'd also like you to make sure that your field researchers know the following things and keep them in mind as they're collecting their data. So attendees can answer the questions as either an interview or just stop and complete it themselves on the tablet. One of the resources that we posted to the Google folder is the training manual that we use every year in North Carolina, and it has a number of different sort of intro lines that people could use to approach people and say, hey, do you mind if I walk with you and ask you a few questions about the festival today? Or, you know, there are lots of different ways that you can approach that. But if people want to keep going and keep having the festival experience, then we encourage them to do that. And so your field researchers can be mobile in that way. They can walk with a family, go to the next booth, float around with them for a while, and do the survey as an interview. That's part of why the training that we give usually requires the field researchers to verbally administer the survey to other field researchers a few times before we let them loose on the general public. So again, it can be given as an interview, or people can step aside and use the tablet themselves to complete it as a survey. It's intended for an individual person and not a group. It's important that we get data from individuals and only individuals on the survey. There are some strategies and some language that you can use to try to guide your groups in that direction, and that's in one of the training manuals on Google Docs as well. Anybody over the age of 10 is eligible to take the survey. So the first person above the age of 10 to cross the imaginary line is somebody that you can approach and ask to take part in the survey. If you have kid questions on your survey that kids as young as 5 or whatever your age limit is can answer, we're going to defer to the survey itself and the parents to make those decisions. So there is that question that sets up the skip pattern that says the next questions vary based on if you're older or younger than the age of 10. How old are you? That's a great opportunity for parents to hand the tablet over to their kids if they're interested. What happens a lot of the time at festivals is that you'll approach a grown-up and they'll defer to the kids. And so you can have your field researchers set that up as well, so that if the parents say, well, can she take it or can he take it, referring to one of their children, you can say, absolutely, we actually have some questions for kids and then some questions for parents as well. Go ahead and find out how old the child is, enter that information so that the kid questions pop up, and then the kid can hand the tablet back to you, and you can pass it back on to the parents when the time comes. If you have more than one child in a family who wants to do the survey, we're going to ask that you have the parent complete the survey with the first child to complete it, and then if there are other kids who want to do the survey, the burden is going to be on your field researchers. The level of skip patterning that exists in this survey was too complex for us to find a way to loop the survey so that multiple kids from a family could actually take it. And so we're going to ask that the family goes through it once in its entirety with a kid paired with a parent the way that it's intended. And then if other kids want to do it, the field researchers can scroll forward to the kid questions. When the kid hands the tablet back, once they get to that page that says, please hand the tablet to your grown-up, the field researcher can quickly scroll through the rest of the questions and submit those data. Data entry for paper surveys. If you want your data, if you're collecting paper data and you want them to also be entered in the common database that we're using for EvalFest, you're going to need to have access to a tablet to do that data entry. QuickTap does not have a web-based or desktop-based option for entering data yet. And so we're not able to offer that at this point. You'll have to use a tablet for that. The good news is that data collection on the tablet is incredibly fast. And so we don't think it will take much time to get that done. I know I got an email from Gina this morning saying that she collected a ton of paper data this weekend at her festival, and she's already got all of that entered. And so it is indeed field, I guess, ground truth according to Idaho at this point, and a pretty quick process. We do want to ask that you try to enter your paper-based surveys on the tablets before you send them to their next festival destination. And so if that means thinking about how to set some staff time aside, some work study student time aside, hiring extra field researchers to get those in, it's ideal for all of that data entry to be done before you send the tablets on to their next locale. All right. My last few slides are about sharing out, but before I get into that, does anybody have questions about data collection and particularly about the prescribed procedure for how to approach attendees?
Karen, it's Denise. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
There's a question about how you evaluate the field researchers. Can you speak to that for a second?
So I'm guessing by evaluate, how do I decide if they are okay to go into the field?
It seems like okay to go in the field from a quality perspective, but also I think from how many surveys they collect, like they're kind of.
Oh, yeah. Great. Awesome question. So a couple of things. I would not send anybody out into the field that I haven't talked to directly first. I typically look for people who do have some statistics coursework in their education history, and ideally somebody who has who's conducted interviews, done focus groups, had some other experience where they're interacting directly with the public to collect data in one capacity or the other. And then I schedule a quick phone conversation with folks. I usually do that. I usually know who I want to hire and who I don't. And so schedule that as sort of a final quick interview and orientation to what the data collection activity is really going to be. But I use that to make sure that I'm comfortable with the social skills of the people that I'm sending out. The other thing to mention is that I don't collect data myself during any of the large events where we have a team of field researchers out and about. Instead, everybody has my phone number, and I respond to texts and help with troubleshooting. But I also walk around to make sure people are doing what I've asked them to do. And if somebody that I thought was going to be fine either isn't following the procedures that I asked them to follow, or is not as savvy and as appropriate with the members of the public as I would want them to be, then I just end their shift early and send them home. So I do think there is a level of oversight. You know, part of what I talk about when I am hiring people is that the field researchers look like the festival team. They've got the t-shirt on, they've got the button on, so they are representing the festival, even though they may have only heard about the festival through the ad that I placed on Craigslist. And so it's really important to me and to the quality control of the festivals that I help evaluate to make sure that those people are going to be sending the right message. And I take that very seriously, and so I sort of spy on them throughout the data collection to make sure that they're doing what I would want to see them do.
Karen, this is Gina. Hi. I just wanted to make one suggestion that helped us a lot yesterday, Saturday. So it was good because this was really very helpful because some of our folks were not experienced survey, they hadn't done this before. And so what we did was we actually set up a booth where we had another small activity, and for us it was, for those of you who on the phone call or are members of COPUS, you know about the COPUS Promise, and we try and get people to make the COPUS Promise. Well, what we did was by having this little activity where they come and do the COPUS Promise, which takes 2 minutes, it made people look at us. And so as we counted they would often come to our table, and then we'd count our fifth, we'd have our fifth person in mind, and they're at our table looking at this COPUS Promise. So it was really easy for us to say, oh, well, when you do this, now would you like to take our survey? And so it really made our job of approaching people very easy, and that made it very comfortable for people who hadn't done that sort of thing before. But it also caused one problem for us. If they came to our booth, we gave, and they did the survey, they got a pin. And many of those people had a pin, and so Karen, you can answer this question for us. So many of those people had a pin, or they had a sticker because they saw it made the promise. And then later on, we'd see people going by our activity who had that pin and that sticker, and so we knew they'd already visited us. Well, we're supposed to take every fifth eligible person or group. Do they count as eligible? Do they count when you're counting 5? Because we know they've already visited us.
Yeah, I would say no. If you've got an identifier on your attendee and you know they've already participated, they're no longer eligible to participate.
That was what we guessed, and that's what we did, but we weren't sure.
Anybody else have questions or comments? Okay. The last thing that I wanted to try to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
When you hand the tablet to a child, do you ever have problems with the reading level, with them being able to read the items?
I think that is definitely a possibility, particularly for festivals that want to collect data from, kids in the 5 to 8, 5 to 10 range. And I would tend to defer to parents in that instance if it was me, but if you've got a child who can't possibly read all of the language, then you could have your field researcher do it as an interview with the children, and then physically hand the tablet to the parents when they're done.
Karen, we found that we read the questions to the kids, but the kids like to push the buttons. So we read the question and then they push the buttons. Because the little ones just really like interacting with the iPad.
Yep. And I've used QuickTap in another project as well, and the little kids especially light up when they get to see it. So I think that's a great strategy, you know, to prepare your field researchers for that. And that's a good question because I had not considered that. But I think you want to make sure that your field researchers are going to be comfortable, you know, squatting down, getting on the kids' level, showing the kid the iPad and helping them do it if the parents don't take that role on themselves.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. I just got the note that it is 3 o'clock, and that is true. And so I think what we're going to do, I'm going to say a couple things really fast just to sort of give away the punchline for this sharing with the community. What we want to do is create a very short template for folks to use to share out the biggest successes of your evaluation, the biggest challenges, the coolest data you learned, the coolest data that you got or the coolest thing you learned from your evaluation, how you're going to use the information you got, and what you want to know that you still haven't been able to find out. So it's 5 quick slides that we would like everybody to plan to populate and then share out either as part of your affinity group or as part of the larger community webinars. And we'll be sending that template out as well as a couple of examples. We also are going to ask you to share a few specific characteristics about the events where you're collecting data. So when it comes to the larger idea of using these data to start to meaningfully look across different festivals and different events even within a festival, we're going to want to know what kind of a venue the event was hosted at, the target age group, whether it was a hands-on activity, what kind of an audience it was supposed to serve, those sort of basic characteristics so that we can use those to start to organize and sort of slice and dice the data. And so we're going to be asking you to send us that information only from the events where you collect attendee data. And so we'll be pulling together that template, and we'll send all of that out in an email sometime soon. And then in our March webinar, what we're going to have in March is our first affinity group meetings. We'll be sending more information about that as well, and we'll add this piece to the agenda so that we can sort of talk about sharing out and the different kinds of characteristics that we're going to want everybody to record as festivals happen across the year. So for now, that is it. Are there any final questions or final comments that anybody has to share? Okay. Apologies again for the very late start, and thank you for bearing with us and for calling in today. We'll look forward to seeing you again next month.
See you then.